Hi everyone. My name is Megan Walsh. I'm 31 years old, and for most of my life, I thought being the responsible one in my family just meant I'd never be anyone's favorite. I want to tell you what happened at my younger sister's wedding 3 months ago. Because I've replayed it in my head almost every single night since, and I still don't fully understand how one afternoon could unravel 12 years of silence. But I need you to understand something first. This isn't really a story about a wedding. It's a story about what happens when you spend your whole life being told you're not enough, and then one day, somebody else finally says it out loud, in front of everyone. And you realize you have a choice. You can keep shrinking, or you can stop. I chose to stop, and it cost me almost everything I thought I wanted. Let me back up. I'm the oldest of two. My sister Brianna is 28, 3 years younger than me, and from the time we were kids. There was never any real mystery about which one of us was the pretty one. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I say it because it's just a fact everyone in my family agreed on so early and so often that it became furniture. Like a couch nobody questions anymore. It's just there. Brianna had our mother's coloring, light brown hair that went golden in the summer, easy symmetrical features. The kind of face that photographs well even when she's not trying. I look more like my dad's side. Heavier brow, a nose I hated for most of my 20s, skin that breaks out under stress, which, growing up in my house, was constantly. My mother, Carol, never said it in those exact words. She didn't need to. She said it in 100 smaller ways. Brianna, stand up straight, you have such a pretty frame, never said to me. Megan, you're so smart, you don't need to worry about that stuff, said like a consolation prize. When I was 16 and Brianna was 13, my mom took her dress shopping for a school dance and came home buzzing, showing my dad 3 different options on her phone. When it was my turn for a dance 2 years later, she handed me $40 and said, "Just get something simple." You don't really do the dress thing. I didn't do the dress thing. That was the story. Not that I wasn't given the chance, that I simply wasn't built for it, so I leaned into what I was apparently built for instead. I got good grades. I got a scholarship. I became the one who handled things, who drove 4 hours home when our grandmother got sick, who filled out my parents' refinancing paperwork because my dad didn't understand the online portal, who remembered every birthday, every anniversary, every can you just. And Brianna got to be Brianna. Beautiful, charming, a little chaotic, always somehow forgiven. I'm telling you all this background because I need you to feel what I felt walking into this story, already 28 years deep into a pattern. I wasn't a blank slate when Brianna got engaged. I was a woman who had spent her entire life learning that love in my family was conditional, and the condition was usually, be useful or be pretty. I'd picked useful a long time ago, because it was the only door that was ever actually open to me. If you've ever been the other sibling, the one who wasn't the favorite, you already know exactly the kind of exhausted I'm talking about. The kind where you're not even angry anymore. You're just tired. Brianna met Daniel about 2 years before the wedding. He worked in commercial real estate, was steady, polite, a little reserved, the opposite of every guy she dated before, which honestly worried me a little at first. Because it felt like he might not know what he was signing up for. I liked him immediately, for what it's worth. He was the first person Brianna brought home who actually asked me questions about my life and seemed to remember the answers later. Small thing. But in my family, small things had started to feel enormous. When they got engaged, I cried real tears, happy ones. I want that on the record, because everything that happened after makes it sound like I was some bitter older sister lying in wait. I wasn't. I was genuinely, stupidly hopeful that this wedding could be the thing that finally pulled me back into the center of my family instead of the edge of it. I should have known better. But hope is a hard habit to break, especially with people who raised you. The morning Brianna called to ask me to be a bridesmaid, I actually sat down on my kitchen floor. I don't know why the floor. I just needed to be lower to the ground for that conversation, like my body knew it was significant before my brain caught up. "Obviously, you have to be in it," she said. "You're my sister." I remember exactly what I said back. "I would love that. Thank you for asking me. Thank you for asking me." Like being included in my own sister's wedding was a gift I had to be grateful for. I didn't notice that part at the time. I notice it now. For the first few months, everything was normal. Dress shopping, a group chat with the other 4 bridesmaids, Brianna's college roommate, 2 work friends, and our cousin Paige venue visits, the usual logistics. I paid for my dress without complaint, organized the bachelorette weekend because nobody else volunteered, and tried not to think too hard about the fact that Brianna corrected my seating chart suggestions 3 separate times without ever explaining why. The cracks started small, they always do. There was a dress fitting about 5 months before the wedding where the bridal boutique consultant, a sweet woman named Renata, lined all 5 of us up in front of the mirror to check how the bridesmaid dresses looked together. They were a deep emerald green, which actually suited me. For once in my life, a color my family picked actually worked with my skin tone. Brianna stood behind us, arms crossed, studying the lineup with the same expression she used to get when she was rearranging furniture in her apartment. Calculating. Not unkind exactly. Just assessing. "Can we move Megan to the end?" she asked Renata, not me. Renata, to her credit, looked a little confused. "Sure, is there a reason?" "It's just for photos," Brianna said breezily. "I want the lineup to kind of flow, height-wise, color-wise, no big deal." I moved to the end of the line. I told myself it really was no big deal. Photographers do ask people to line up by height sometimes. I'd seen that on Pinterest boards. It was a reasonable thing to ask for. I want you to notice how fast I did that. How fast I built the excuse for her before she'd even finished the sentence. That's not an accident. That's 28 years of practice. 2 months later, Brianna asked me to come over to her apartment to go over the final bridesmaid details, hair appointments, makeup trial scheduling, the timeline for the morning of. Daniel was at work. It was just the 2 of us, sitting on her gray sectional with her laptop open between us. A shared spreadsheet on the screen that she'd titled Wedding Master Doc, "Do not edit without asking." That title should have told me something. But I scrolled past it. We went through hair and makeup times, transportation, the rehearsal dinner seating. It was almost pleasant. For about 40 minutes, I let myself believe this was just 2 sisters planning a wedding together. The way I'd imagined it would feel back, when we were kids playing dress-up and promising, we'd be each other's maid of honor someday. Then she got to the photography section. "So Daniel's photographer wants individual bridesmaid portraits before the ceremony," Brianna said, not looking at me, scrolling through something on her phone. "Like solo shots of each of you in your dress by the window, candid stuff." "That sounds nice," I said. "Yeah." She paused, set her phone down. And then she did the thing she always did right before she said something cruel. She softened her voice, almost apologetic, like she was about to deliver bad medical news instead of an insult. "I was actually thinking maybe you could skip that part. Skip the portraits, just the solo ones. You'd still be in all the group shots, obviously." "Why would I skip them?" Brianna sighed. The kind of sigh that's meant to suggest the other person is being difficult for asking a normal follow-up question. "Megan, don't make this weird. It's just the photographer is doing this whole aesthetic thing and he wants a certain look for the solo portraits. It's not personal." "What look?" "I don't know, like a cohesive bridal party aesthetic." He showed me examples. Everyone in them was kind of. "I don't know how to say this without you getting upset." "Try." She actually laughed a little, like I was being dramatic for wanting an actual answer. "Okay, fine." He said the solo shots work best with girls who have, like, a certain bone structure. Model adjacent. It's an editorial thing, not a personal thing. I sat very still on that gray sectional. I remember the specific quality of the silence in that apartment, her air purifier humming in the corner, a car alarm somewhere outside. The absolute stillness of my own body, while my chest did something complicated and painful. "So you're saying I'm not pretty enough for the solo portraits," I said. "I'm saying the photographer has a vision. Brianna, it's not me saying it," she said, finally looking up, defensive now. Like I'd accused her of something, instead of just repeating her own sentence back to her. "I'm just relaying what he said. I didn't even want to bring it up. I knew you'd make it a whole thing. I want to pause here and tell you something important. Because I think a lot of people who haven't lived this exact dynamic might wonder why I didn't just stand up and leave right then. Why I didn't say something sharper, something that matched the size of what had just happened. Here's the truth. When you've spent your entire life being the other sibling, you develop this specific, exhausting skill. You learn to absorb the hit without flinching, because flinching gets labeled as being sensitive, or making it weird, or always playing the victim. So instead, you go quiet. You go very, very quiet, and you let the thing land somewhere deep inside you where you'll deal with it later, alone when it's safe. That's what I did. I said, "Okay," and I went back to the spreadsheet, and we finished planning hair appointment times like nothing had happened. I drove home that night and sat in my car in my own driveway for 25 minutes before I went inside. I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at my garage door, doing the math on 28 years of evidence that had just been confirmed by a sentence relayed secondhand from a photographer I'd never met. If you've ever had a moment like that, where someone hands you proof of something you already suspected, but had managed to half convince yourself wasn't true, you know that specific kind of quiet. It's not sad exactly. It's more like grief for a version of your family that you now have to admit never actually existed. I told myself I'd let it go. I told myself the wedding was about Brianna and Daniel, not about me. And that I wasn't going to be the sister who made a scene over a photography detail 3 months before the biggest day of her sister's life. I want you to remember that decision because it matters later. I chose peace. I chose it on purpose with my eyes open, even though it cost me something. 3 weeks after that conversation, things escalated in a way I genuinely did not see coming. It was a Tuesday evening. I was at my apartment, making dinner, half watching something on TV when my phone rang. It was our mother, Carol. "Megan, honey, can you talk?" Something in her voice made me turn the stove off. My mother doesn't usually call to chat. She calls when there's a logistics problem that needs solving, and I am the solver. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, exactly. It's just Brianna mentioned something to me, and I wanted to talk to you about it before it became a thing." There it was, before it became a thing. As if the thing hadn't already been decided somewhere without me. "Mom, just tell me." She's restructuring the bridal party a little bit, visually. For the photos and the videography, apparently they're doing a whole cinematic thing with a videographer, not just photos, and she wants the lineup to be really tight. Aesthetically, "Mom, I know how this is going to sound, but try not to take it personally. Mom, just say it." She took a breath. I could picture her exactly, standing in her kitchen, probably with the phone wedged between her shoulder and her ear, doing dishes while she delivered this. Because my mother has never once in her life sat still for a hard conversation. She wants to move you from bridesmaid to a reading role instead, like doing one of the readings during the ceremony. It's actually a really meaningful part, Megan. A lot of people would. She's removing me from the bridal party. She's not removing you from the wedding. She's removing me from being a bridesmaid. After I already bought the dress, after I already planned the bachelorette, 3 months before the wedding, my mother was quiet for a second. And then she said the sentence that I have not been able to stop hearing since. "Honey, I think she just wants the bridesmaid photos to look a certain way, and you know how you two are built differently. It's not an insult, it's just logistics. You know how you two are built differently." I want to make sure you really sit with that sentence the way I had to sit with it, alone, in my kitchen, with the stove still warm and dinner going cold. My own mother, the woman who raised me, did not say, "That's a horrible thing for her to do," or "I'll talk to her," or even "I'm sorry you're hearing this." She explained it. She made it sound reasonable. She did the same thing Brianna had done, softened her voice right before delivering the cruelty, like kindness in tone could erase cruelty in content. "So you agree with her," I said. "I didn't say that. You're explaining why it makes sense. I'm trying to help you not be hurt by something that isn't really about you. It's literally about my face, Mom." "How is that not about me?" She didn't have an answer for that, or she had one and didn't want to say it out loud, which honestly might be worse. I told her I needed to think about it and hung up the phone. And then I did something I'm not proud of, but I think it's important to be honest about. I went into my bathroom and stood in front of the mirror for a long time, really looking at my own face. Trying to see what they were seeing. Trying to identify the specific flaw that had apparently disqualified me from standing next to my own sister in a photograph. I didn't find it. I just found my own face, tired and confused and 31 years old, looking back at me. If you've ever stood in front of a mirror after someone you love confirmed your worst fear about yourself, you know there's no answer waiting in that reflection. There's just you, and the silence, and the slow realization that the problem was never actually your face. The problem was a family that needed someone to be lesser, so someone else could be the favorite, and you got cast in that role before you were old enough to audition for anything else. I called Brianna the next day. I'd practiced what I wanted to say about 6 different ways in the shower that morning, and every version came out sounding either too angry or too pathetic. So I just went with the plainest one I had. "Mom told me you want me to do a reading instead of being a bridesmaid. Did she tell you why?" "She said something about the photos." Brianna exhaled, and I could hear her shifting around. Probably pacing her apartment, the way she does when she's annoyed. "Okay, look, I didn't want it to come out like this. I wanted to talk to you about it myself calmly, but apparently Mom panicked and called you. So tell me yourself." Calmly, "Megan, it's not that big of a deal. A reading is honestly a more meaningful role in some ways. You'd be up at the front, everyone would hear your voice. I don't want a more meaningful role. I want to know why I'm being removed from the bridal party 3 months before the wedding, after everything I've already paid for and planned." There was a pause. And then Brianna's voice changed, that specific shift from defensive soft to something harder, something closer to what she actually thought. "Fine, you want me to just say it. The dress doesn't work on you the way it works on everyone else." The photographer pointed it out during the trial shots, and once he said it, I couldn't stop seeing it. "It's not your fault, it's just bone structure, body type, whatever. You're built differently than the rest of us, and in photos it's noticeable, and I don't want noticeable. I want cohesive. This is my wedding day, Megan. I get to want it to look a certain way." I remember the room going very still around me. Not silent, my refrigerator was humming, a dog was barking somewhere outside, but still, in the way a held breath is still. "So I'm too ugly to be your bridesmaid," I said. I needed to hear her actually confirm it, the real words, not the dressed-up version. "Don't put it like that. That's what you're saying. I'm saying you don't fit the look." "That's different from ugly." "It's not different, Brianna. It's the same sentence with better PR. She didn't deny it. She just sighed again, like I was the one being unreasonable for refusing to accept a demotion gracefully. "Can you please just be a reader? It's a beautiful part of the ceremony. People will remember it." I said I needed time to think. I hung up. And then I sat in my car. I seem to do a lot of my real grieving in my car, in case you haven't noticed the pattern, and I let myself cry for the first time through this entire ordeal. Not loud, dramatic crying. The quiet kind, the kind that leaks out the corners of your eyes while you stare straight ahead and try to drive home like a normal person. If you've ever been told, directly or indirectly, by someone who's supposed to love you, that you're not enough to stand next to them, you know there's no clean way to recover from that in 20 minutes in a parking lot. It just sits in you. It changes how you see every mirror after that. I'm going to be honest with you about what I did next, because I think it's the part of this story people relate to the most, even though it's not the part that makes me look strong. I called Brianna back 2 days later and told her I'd do the reading. I want to explain why, because on paper it sounds like I just folded. And I did fold, a little. But the calculation in my head wasn't about Brianna at all. It was about every single family event for the next 30 years. If I made this into a big fight, I would become the sister who caused drama at the wedding for the rest of my life. Every holiday, every reunion, every casual mention of weddings in general would carry that footnote. Brianna had a way of rewriting history so that she was always the reasonable one, and I was always the difficult one. And I knew with the certainty of someone who'd watched this exact pattern play out 100 times, that if I fought this, I would lose the narrative even if I was right. So I chose the smaller hurt. I agreed to be a reader instead of a bridesmaid. I told myself I was being mature. Really, I think I was just exhausted, and exhaustion has a way of dressing itself up as maturity when you're not paying close attention. Here's a CTA moment, and I promise it connects to the story. If you've ever made yourself smaller to keep family peace, and you're sitting here right now nodding along because you've lived some version of this, I want you to actually think about whether that peace was ever really peace, or if it was just you, alone, absorbing the cost so nobody else had to. Because that question is going to matter a lot more by the end of this story than it seems right now. The next 3 months were quiet, in the specific way a house is quiet right before a storm rolls in. I returned my bridesmaid dress. I bought a new dress for the reading, modest, navy blue, nothing that would draw attention. Because some small punished part of me had decided the safest thing to do was disappear as much as possible. I helped with logistics anyway, because old habits don't just turn off, even after they've been weaponized against you. I confirmed catering numbers. I drove our grandmother to her final dress fitting. I did all the invisible work I'd always done, the work nobody photographs. And then, 6 weeks before the wedding, something happened that I still have trouble fully explaining, even now, even with all this distance. I was at Brianna's apartment again, this time helping her steam the wedding dress that had just arrived from alterations, because apparently I was still useful enough for that. She left to take a call from the venue coordinator, leaving her phone on the kitchen counter while she stepped onto the balcony. A text came through. It lit up the screen, and I genuinely wasn't trying to read it. I was standing right there, hands full of steamer, and it was just in my direct line of sight. The name on the screen was Jake. The preview read, "I still think about that night, can't stop. You sure you're ready for this wedding thing? I want to be completely transparent with you about what went through my head in that moment. Because I think honesty matters more than making myself look like a perfect, composed narrator." My first thought wasn't outrage. My first thought was confusion. Who's Jake? My second thought, slower, colder, was the memory of Brianna's college ex-boyfriend, a guy named Jake Holloway that she dated on and off for almost 3 years before Daniel. The one she always described as the one that got away, but for good reason. The one she still occasionally mentioned with a strange little smile that I'd never thought too hard about. I put the phone down exactly where it had been. I didn't touch it again. I finished steaming the dress with hands that weren't quite steady, and when Brianna came back inside, flushed from the cold balcony air, I said nothing. I told myself for almost a full week that it was none of my business. That text can be misread. That maybe Jake was just an old friend reaching out, harmless, ambiguous, easily explained. But here's the thing about doubt, especially the kind that festers in families like mine, it doesn't stay quiet for long. 3 days after I saw that text, I ran into our cousin Paige, one of the actual bridesmaids, at our grandmother's birthday lunch. Paige had always been close with Brianna, closer than I'd ever managed to be, and she had 2 glasses of wine in her and a loose tongue. "Can I tell you something, and you have to swear you didn't hear it from me?" Paige said, leaning across the table while our mother was distracted talking to our grandmother. My stomach dropped before she even said anything else. "What? Brianna's been weird about Jake again, like weird. She made me promise not to mention him around Daniel, and when I asked why, she got all defensive and changed the subject. Define weird. Paige glanced over her shoulder, lowered her voice further. He showed up at her bachelorette. Did you know that? Not at the actual party, outside the bar after. She went out to meet him for like 20 minutes and told the rest of us she was taking a work call. I felt something cold settle into my chest. The specific feeling of a suspicion, confirming itself faster than you wanted it to. How do you know it was him? Because I followed her out to make sure she was okay, and then I saw them and just turned around and went back inside. I didn't say anything because I figured it wasn't my business, and honestly I still don't really know what to do with it. I sat there at my grandmother's birthday lunch, surrounded by balloons and a half-eaten sheet cake, holding a piece of information that felt enormous and radioactive. My sister, who had decided I wasn't pretty enough to stand next to her in photographs, was, as far as I could tell, cheating on her fiancé 6 weeks before their wedding. I want to pause the story here, because I think this is the exact moment where a lot of people would expect me to immediately tell Daniel or immediately confront Brianna, or do something dramatic and satisfying right away. That's not what happened. Real life doesn't usually move that fast, and honestly, the slowness of what came next is part of why this whole thing hurt so much. I spent the next 2 weeks in a kind of low-grade agony. I went back and forth probably 50 times a day. Part of me wanted to march into Brianna's apartment and demand the truth. Part of me wanted to just stay quiet and let her destroy her own life without my involvement. Since she'd made it pretty clear over the past year that my involvement in her life was conditional at best. And part of me, the part I'm least proud of, but the most honest about, wanted to use it. Wanted to hold on to it like a card I could play later, when I needed it, because for the first time in my life, I had information that gave me power in a family where I'd always had none. I didn't act on any of those impulses right away. Instead, I did something smaller and quieter. I tried, very carefully, to get more information. I texted Brianna, casual, low stakes. Hey, random question, are you guys keeping the guest list totally final, or is there still room for +1s? Just want to make sure my coworker's invite is settled. It was a fake question. I didn't have a coworker who needed an invite. I just wanted to see how she'd respond, whether she'd seem normal or off. She responded almost immediately, breezy, totally fine. Guest lists locked in, sorry. Excited for you to do the reading BTW, Mom said you picked a good passage. Completely normal, completely fine. A woman with no idea that her sister had just learned a secret that could blow up her entire wedding. That casualness bothered me more than anything else could have. Because it meant she was capable of behaving with total ease while sitting on something enormous. It meant the version of Brianna who told me I wasn't pretty enough for photos, and the version of Brianna who could cheerfully text about readings while cheating on her fiancé were the exact same person. Fully integrated, no internal conflict required. I want to talk about Daniel for a second, because I think he matters more in this story than people might initially assume. I'd had dinner with him and Brianna maybe a dozen times over their 2-year relationship. He wasn't flashy. He worked hard, he called his mother every Sunday. He remembered that I didn't like cilantro and quietly asked the waiter to leave it off my plate without making a thing of it. He was, by every measure I could see, a genuinely decent person who loved my sister in a way that seemed uncomplicated and real, and he had absolutely no idea what he was walking into. I went back and forth on telling him for almost the entire remaining 6 weeks before the wedding. I made lists in my notes app, actual, literal pros and cons lists, like I was deciding on an apartment instead of whether to detonate my sister's wedding. I want to share a little of what was on that list, because I think it's the most honest window into what I was actually feeling. Reasons to tell him, he deserves to know. He's about to make a legal and financial commitment based on incomplete information. If I don't say anything and he finds out later, after kids, after a mortgage, the damage will be exponentially worse. I would want someone to tell me. Reasons not to tell him, It's not my business. I have no real proof, just a text preview and Paige's second-hand account. If I'm wrong, or if I'm exaggerating what I saw, I will be the villain in this story forever. The bitter, ugly sister who tried to ruin the wedding out of jealousy. Exactly, the narrative Brianna would happily hand to everyone. My family will never, ever believe me over her. They never have before. That last point sat the heaviest, because it was true, I had no actual proof. I had a text preview that could theoretically be explained away, and a second-hand story from Paige that Brianna could simply deny. If I went to my mother with this, I already knew exactly what would happen. She'd believe Brianna. She'd accuse me of trying to sabotage the wedding because I was bitter about the bridesmaid thing. And I would lose. Again, the way I always lost. So I decided to wait, not forever, just until I had something solid enough that nobody could explain it away. The wedding was scheduled for a Saturday in early October. At a vineyard venue about 90 minutes outside the city, the kind of place with string lights and a barn reception hall that probably cost more per hour than most people's monthly rent. I drove up the morning of alone, my reading printed and folded in my purse, my navy blue dress hanging in the back seat of my car. The morning was, on the surface, beautiful. Crisp October light, the vines turning gold at the edges, the smell of someone's coffee mixing with cut grass. I helped with last-minute things, because of course I did, fixing a crooked seating card display, finding safety pins for a bridesmaid's dress that had a loose hem. Calming down our grandmother when she couldn't find her reading glasses. I saw Brianna in her dress for the first time around 11 that morning, in the getting ready suite, surrounded by her bridesmaids and a hired hair and makeup team. She looked, I'll be honest, genuinely beautiful, radiant in the specific way brides are supposed to look. And for one small, treacherous moment, I felt the old familiar urge to just be happy for her, to let everything else go. To be the bigger person, one more time, the way I'd been the bigger person my entire life. Then she looked at me in my navy dress and said, in front of all 4 bridesmaids, "Oh good, you went with something simple. Smart choice. Smart choice." As if I'd made a wardrobe decision based on flattering myself less, rather than being told outright that my face didn't fit her aesthetic. A couple of the bridesmaids exchanged a glance. Just a flicker, barely anything, but I caught it. They knew. Maybe not the full story, but they knew something had happened with me and the bridal party, and that little look told me everyone had already decided whose side they were on. I didn't say anything. I'd promised myself I would get through this day without becoming the sister who made it weird. I helped pin Brianna's veil. I told her she looked beautiful, and I meant it, even with everything else sitting heavy in my chest. The ceremony itself was scheduled for 4 o'clock, with cocktail hour after, and the reception in the barn starting around 6. I want to walk you through the next part slowly, because this is where everything changed, and I think the pacing of how it happened matters. Around 1 in the afternoon, during the lull between getting ready and the actual ceremony, I went looking for a quiet bathroom to fix my makeup, away from the chaos of the bridal suite. The venue had a small private patio area behind the barn, used mostly for vendor staging, mostly empty during the day. I walked past it on my way back from the bathroom and heard voices. I almost kept walking. I want you to know that. I almost just kept walking because some instinct in me already knew I didn't want to hear what was happening on that patio. But Brianna's voice, low and urgent, stopped me. "You can't be here, Jake. Are you insane?" I stopped completely. My heart was doing something violent in my chest. A man's voice, low, tight. "I just need 5 minutes. I'm not trying to start anything. I just need to know if this is actually what you want, because you don't seem like you actually want this." Of course I want this. I'm marrying him in 3 hours. Then why did you text me back last night? Why did you meet me after your bachelorette? A long pause. I stood frozen behind a wall of stacked folding chairs, completely still, listening to my own pulse pound in my ears. "Because I'm scared," Brianna said, and her voice cracked in a way I had genuinely never heard from her before, not once in 28 years. Okay. I'm scared, and you make me feel like I felt before everything got so practical. With Daniel, everything is steady and safe and boring, and with you it's never been steady, but it's never been boring either. And I don't know how to just turn that off because I'm wearing a dress today. So don't marry him. It's not that simple, Jake. Why not? You're not even married yet. There's still time to just not do this. Because everyone is here, because my mother spent $30,000 on this. Because if I don't go through with it today, I become the woman who ruined her own wedding for an ex-boyfriend who couldn't even commit to me the first time around. I want to tell you that in that moment I felt triumphant. Vindicated. I want to tell you it felt good to have proof, real proof, finally, undeniable, after weeks of wondering if I was overreacting to a single text message. It didn't feel good. It felt like standing in a burning building and realizing you're the only one who knows where the fire started. I backed away from that patio as quietly as I could, my legs shaking, and walked fast around the other side of the barn until I found a bench far enough away that nobody could see me. I sat down and just breathed for a long time, trying to figure out what on earth I was supposed to do with what I'd just heard. Here's where I have to be honest about the ugliest, most human part of this story. For about 10 minutes, sitting on that bench, I genuinely considered doing nothing. Letting it happen. Letting Brianna marry Daniel with this secret intact. Let her live with whatever consequences came from that choice, and let me walk away clean, no responsibility, no confrontation. No risk of becoming the villain in everyone's retelling. It would have been so easy. Nobody would have ever known I'd heard anything. But I kept thinking about Daniel asking the waiter to leave the cilantro off my plate. I kept thinking about how decent, how unsuspicious, how trusting he'd been with every single person in our family, including me. And I thought about my own life, about every time I'd swallowed an unfairness to keep the peace, every time I'd made myself smaller so nobody else had to feel uncomfortable. Every time silence had been the price of belonging in my own family. I thought, if I stay silent one more time, I am choosing, on purpose, with full knowledge, to let a good man marry someone who is actively betraying him hours before the ceremony. Purely so I don't have to deal with the fallout of telling the truth. That felt like a different kind of cowardice than the ones I'd practiced my whole life. This one had a victim who wasn't me. I didn't go straight to Daniel. I want to be clear about that, because I think it matters for how this actually played out. I went to Brianna first. I found her back in the bridal suite around 2:30, the other bridesmaids stepping out briefly to coordinate something with the photographer, giving me, by pure accident, a window alone with her. "We need to talk," I said. She looked at me in the mirror, still in her robe, hair half finished, and something in my face must have told her this wasn't about a seating chart. "What's wrong? I heard you, on the patio, with Jake." I watched the color drain out of her face in real time. It's a strange thing, watching someone realize they've been caught. There's a specific half-second where their whole body seems to recalibrate, deciding in an instant whether to deny, deflect, or collapse. "It's not what you think," she said, which is, I think, the single most predictable sentence in the English language for exactly this situation. "I heard the whole thing, Brianna. I heard you say you're scared. I heard you say it's not simple. I heard you say everything is too steady with Daniel. You don't understand the context. I understand perfectly. You're about to marry a man who has no idea his fiancée met up with her ex during her own bachelorette party, and is apparently still doing it the morning of the wedding. Please don't do this," she said, and her voice cracked again, the same crack from the patio. Except now it was aimed directly at me, instead of at Jake. "Please, I will fix this. I'll end it with Jake completely today, right now. I'll never speak to him again, just please don't tell Daniel. Please, not today. Not like this. I want to tell you something about this exact moment, because it's the hinge the entire rest of the story swings on. My sister, who 6 weeks earlier had told me I wasn't pretty enough to stand next to her in photographs, was now begging me, actually begging, tears starting, hands shaking to protect her secret. The same sister who'd never once protected me from anything. A part of me, an old, tired, 28 years deep part of me, almost said yes. Almost said, okay, fine, I won't say anything. Because some instinct in me was still wired to make her comfortable, still wired to absorb the cost so she wouldn't have to. But then I thought about Daniel again, about the life he thought he was walking into in 90 minutes. About every guest already arriving at the venue, every dollar already spent. Every person who was about to witness a ceremony built on a lie that only 3 people in the world currently knew about Brianna, Jake, and me. I'm not going to be the one who lies to him, I said, but I'm also not going to be the one who announces this in front of 200 people. You have time right now, before the ceremony, to tell him yourself. That's the only version of this where you get to control anything. And if I don't, I looked at my sister, really looked at her. In a way I don't think I had in years, and I said the truest thing I'd said to her in a decade. Then I will, she didn't tell him, I gave her almost an hour. I sat in the back row of folding chairs as guests started arriving, smiling at relatives, accepting hugs, doing the strange performance of normalcy while carrying the heaviest secret of my life. I kept glancing toward the bridal suite, hoping I'd see some sign that Brianna had pulled Daniel aside, that the wedding would quietly be postponed. That this could resolve itself without me having to be the one who said it out loud. At 3:50, 10 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to start, I saw Daniel near the entrance of the barn in his suit, laughing with his groomsmen, completely at ease, completely unaware. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that Brianna had decided to go through with it anyway, gambling that I wouldn't actually follow through on what I'd said. She'd misjudged that. For the first time in our entire lives, she had badly, fundamentally misjudged me. I'm not going to pretend what happened next was some calm, composed moment of moral clarity. It wasn't. My hands were shaking. My mouth was dry. Every instinct I'd spent 31 years building told me to sit down, smile, get through the ceremony, and let this be someone else's problem. I walked over to Daniel instead. Can I talk to you for a second, privately? He looked surprised but nodded, stepping a few feet away from his groomsmen, still smiling, still completely unsuspecting. Everything okay? Is Brianna all right? I had exactly one chance to say this in a way that didn't sound insane, didn't sound like jealousy, didn't sound like the bitter sister getting revenge for the bridesmaid thing. I'd thought about this moment for an hour, and I still didn't have a perfect version of it. I just had the truth. I need you to ask Brianna one question before you walk down that aisle, I said. I need you to ask her if she's been in contact with Jake Holloway. Ask her specifically. Don't let her give you a vague answer. His face changed slowly, the easy smile fading into something more careful. Who's Jake Holloway? Her college ex. I overheard them together about an hour ago, on the back patio. I'm not going to tell you what to do with that. I'm just telling you that you deserve to ask the question before you say yes today, not after. I watched something break very slightly behind his eyes, not collapse, not yet. Just the first crack of doubt entering a morning that had been, up until that exact second, entirely uncomplicated for him. Are you serious right now? I wish I wasn't. He didn't say anything else to me. He turned and walked toward the bridal suite, and I stood there in the October sunlight, surrounded by 200 arriving guests, having just detonated something I couldn't take back. I don't know exactly what happened inside that suite, because I wasn't in the room. But I know what happened next, because the entire venue knew within about 15 minutes, and I've since pieced together the rest from Paige, who was standing close enough to hear most of it. Daniel walked in and asked Brianna, directly in front of the remaining bridesmaids, "Have you been in contact with Jake Holloway?" according to Paige. Brianna's face did something complicated. That same half-second recalibration I'd watched happen in front of me an hour earlier. She tried to say something dismissive, something like, "Who told you that?" Which is, of course, the worst possible response to give, because it confirms there's something to be told. Megan, Daniel apparently said. She told me. Is it true? And Brianna, faced with her fiancé, her wedding dress, 200 guests outside, and a sister who had finally refused to protect her secret. Did the thing I think she'd actually wanted to do on that patio an hour earlier, the thing she hadn't had the courage to say out loud to Jake. She told the truth, sort of. It's not what you think, she said again, that same useless sentence. And then, apparently, she actually started crying, real crying, and admitted that she'd seen Jake at her bachelorette. That they'd been texting, that she didn't know what she wanted, that she was scared, that she was sorry. Daniel didn't yell. From what Paige told me, he just stood there for what felt like an extremely long time, and then he said one more sentence before he walked out of that suite, still in his full suit. Still wearing the boutonniere Brianna had picked out for him. I needed you to be sure you're not sure, and then he left. I want to slow down here, because I think this is the part everyone watching wants the most detail on, and honestly, it's the part I remember most vividly myself. The ceremony, obviously, did not happen at 4 o'clock. Word spread through the gathering crowd of guests in that specific, electric way bad news spreads at events. In whispers, in glances, in people suddenly checking their phones for no reason. Within 20 minutes, almost everyone outside knew something had gone catastrophically wrong, even if most of them didn't know exactly what. My mother found me near the gift table, her face white, her voice somewhere between panic and fury. What did you do? I told Daniel the truth. What truth, Megan? What are you talking about? Asked Brianna. I'm asking you. I looked at my mother, the woman who had told me months earlier that I was built differently, as if that explained away cruelty. The woman who had never once, in 31 years, taken my side over my sister's, and I felt something settle in me that I can only describe as calm. Not happy, not triumphant, just calm, the specific calm of someone who has finally stopped trying to manage everyone else's comfort at the expense of her own integrity. Brianna's been seeing her ex behind Daniel's back, I said. I found out by accident. I gave her the chance to tell him herself hours ago, and she chose not to. So I told him instead, because he deserved to know before he made a lifelong promise to her, not after. You could have just stayed quiet. I've stayed quiet my whole life, Mom. I'm done. My mother didn't have a response to that. For maybe the first time I can remember, she just stood there silent, while I walked away. The next 2 hours were chaos in the way only a canceled wedding can be. Caterers needed direction nobody could give. Guests slowly trickled away, some confused, some clearly having pieced together enough to understand the broad shape of what had happened. Our grandmother sat in a folding chair near the gift table, holding her unused corsage, asking anyone who passed by what was going on, and nobody had the heart to fully explain it to her. I found Daniel about an hour later, sitting alone on the same bench I'd hidden on earlier that day, his jacket off, his tie loosened, staring out at the vineyard rows in the fading afternoon light. I almost didn't approach him. I'd already done the hardest part of what I needed to do, and some part of me worried that showing up now would feel like I was looking for credit, or comfort, or some kind of validation for what I'd done. But I sat down anyway, a respectful distance away, and didn't say anything for a long moment. Thank you, he finally said, not looking at me. I know that probably wasn't easy. It wasn't. Why'd you do it? You could have just let it happen and stayed out of it. Easier for you. I thought about how to answer that honestly. Because you asked the waiter to skip the cilantro on my plate 2 years ago and didn't make a thing out of it. Because you're the first person in my family's orbit who ever treated me like I mattered without me having to earn it first. And because I spent my whole life watching the people I loved get away with things, because nobody wanted to deal with the discomfort of saying something. I didn't want to be one more person who let that happen to you. He nodded slowly, still staring out at the vines. She told me you weren't even supposed to be a bridesmaid. That she changed it to a reading because of how you'd look in photos. I felt my throat tighten. She told you that? She told me a lot of things in the last hour, trying to explain herself. That one stuck with me, though. Because I remember asking her, right before all this, if you were one of the bridesmaids, and she said no, that you'd decided you didn't want to be. That you preferred the reading role. He finally looked at me. That wasn't true, was it? No, she's been lying about a lot more than just Jake. I didn't say anything to that. There wasn't really anything left to add. We sat there together for a while longer, not talking, just watching the light change over the vineyard. Two people who'd both just had the same family member rearrange the truth around them for her own comfort. It was, strangely, one of the most peaceful moments of that entire day. I want to tell you what happened in the weeks after, because I think the aftermath matters just as much as the explosion itself, maybe more. My mother called me the next morning, and the conversation was about as difficult as I expected. She didn't apologize. She wanted to understand why I'd chosen that day, of all days, as if the timing was the actual problem rather than the affair itself. I told her, as calmly as I could, that I hadn't chosen the timing, Brianna had, by deciding to walk down the aisle anyway instead of telling Daniel herself when she had the chance. She's devastated, my mother said. Her whole life just fell apart. She did that, not me. You could have let her handle it privately. She had hours to handle it privately, Mom. She chose not to. My mother didn't have a response to that either. The call ended with her saying she needed time, which, translated from 31 years of experience with this exact woman, meant she needed time to figure out how to keep being angry at me without admitting that I'd actually done the right thing. Brianna didn't speak to me for almost 2 months. When she finally did, it was a long text message, not a phone call, which told me almost everything I needed to know about where her head was. She said I'd humiliated her in front of everyone she knew. She said I'd clearly been looking for revenge ever since the bridesmaid situation, and that this was my way of getting back at her, for something she still, even then, refused to call cruel. She called it a logistics decision about the photos. I wrote back one message, and I meant every word of it. I didn't do this for revenge. I did it because you were about to make Daniel promise his whole life to you while you were lying to him about something enormous. The bridesmaid thing hurt me more than I think you'll ever understand, but that's not why I told him. I told him because it was true, and because nobody else in this family was ever going to tell him, and because I refuse to keep being the person who stays quiet so everyone else stays comfortable. I'm sorry the wedding fell apart. I'm not sorry I told the truth. She didn't respond to that message. As far as I know, she's read it probably 100 times since, because that's the kind of person Brianna is. She revisits wounds the way other people revisit photo albums. Daniel and Brianna never got back together, obviously. The wedding venue eventually refunded a portion of the deposit, which became its own months-long argument between my parents and Brianna about who was finank.